Hello and welcome to Changing What's Possible, the Disability Innovation Podcast brought to you by the Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and this season we are excited to bring you remarkable stories of life-changing technology. And today we have with us Christian Doran from the company RecoveryVR. And Christian is going to talk about how they are increasing engagement and enjoyment during therapy sessions for people with a wide variety of health conditions and disabilities. And in the second half of our episode, we are going to hear from a clinician who has firsthand experience using RecoveryVR with their patients. So listeners, let's get started today. Christian, we really appreciate you spending time with us and joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Marie. This is great.
Well, we are excited to learn a little bit more about you. So can you just dive in here and tell us what is your role within the company and maybe tell us a little bit about RecoveryVR in general?
My role is CEO and founder. I've started creating this, building this from the bottom up. And RecoveryVR, I think in general terms, is a VR application that helps people rehabilitate from neurological injury. But I mean, that is widening out. There's so much application for VR in the health space that we're trying to keep the focus on physical rehabilitation because there's just so much to do. It's not just physical rehabilitation. It's also a suite of telehealth functionality. So our main mission at RecoveryVR is to bring low-cost healthcare to people, especially in rural and remote areas that possibly don't have access to healthcare. That's where I really see VR helping, being a connection to specialists that aren't available in your local area.
Fantastic. I think that's so important. And I think with the pandemic, these past couple of years, this idea of telehealth has been exploding. So good timing.
Yeah. I wish I'd had the idea 5 years ago so I'd be ready for the pandemic. But absolutely, the idea of telehealth and the ease of telehealth has just kind of creeped into the way that we think about our health and how we interact with the medical industry. So it's in a good place for people to start understanding that VR can deliver treatments. It can do things that possibly we can't do it any other way. And that connection is strengthened, and the amount of time that you get in therapy using VR in the home is incredible. And I think that's one of the most powerful things. It does just help increase the amount of exercise you can do, the amount of relaxation that you can do, all of the things that might not be as fun when you're doing it by yourself, but when you're in VR and we're creating experiences that motivate that, it just gets up that time on task and up the reps of the therapy that people really need to get back to their own lives.
Definitely. And I'd love to hear the origin story if you can share. How did RecoveryVR get started and why?
I've been in the film industry for the last 15 years. So I have been making kind of million plus films for a long period of time, lots of short films and all sorts of things. And I got a bit, I suppose, tired of the film industry, or maybe my interest just swayed a little bit. And I started getting interested in 360 video. And the best way to experience 360 video is in virtual reality. So I thought, okay, well, I'll explore this a little bit. And the first thing that I did was understand that I wanted to interact with 360 video. I wanted to be photorealistic and I wanted to interact. So I just got a developer and I said, can you make something in virtual reality that when I move the controllers, the video moves forward so I can control how fast or slow the video is playing? And of course, he was like, oh, no, that's going to take me weeks. I was like, oh, can you just give me 1 day? Can you just try for 1 day? And he had something ready in about 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
That's where it all began. I actually just showed that applications to a few people, and I ended up at the Australian Institute of Sport because interest just started growing out of nowhere. And the people at the AAS said, how about rehabilitation? And they were talking about somebody who rides a bike, professional cyclist, and they might have an ACL and they might have to rehabilitate after a bit of surgery. But when you look at the literature, like the academic literature that's coming out from everywhere in the world, there's lots of it around the benefits of VR therapy after stroke, when you've got cerebral palsy, these sorts of neuro conditions. There was really great evidence that it worked. And I just thought, why isn't there a product on the market that actually gives this potential to the people who need it the most? And ever since then, I've just been trying to keep up with the snowball that's rolling next to me as the interest grows. So it's taken on a life of its own. And I'm actually just trying to deliver on the real potential that's there. That's where I come from.
That is phenomenal. Now, for our listeners out there who might not have seen the product, can we unpack it a little bit and maybe describe to them what does RecoveryVR do and how does it work?
Yeah, so we really have come from a basis of kind of stroke. And stroke's an interesting condition because it has so many different elements to it. It's not just the inability to move one of your arms, or it's not just cognitive, it's not just balance. It's all of those things. And they also come with comorbidities of chronic pain and depression and anxiety. So we're trying to attack all of those things. And of course, all of those things are associated with lots of different conditions and might just be a single condition in itself, like chronic pain. So what we do is we gamify evidence-based therapy. So what a clinician might do or a physio might do in a gym, getting people to get their motor functions back through repetitive movement. Some people have to do that for years on end to get back even half of the movement that they once had. And what we do is make that fun. We make that interesting. And I'm really big on motivators. What motivates somebody to do 3 hours of activity every day? That's a lot to ask from anyone. And not everyone's going to be interested in a competition. Not everyone's going to be interested in scores or kind of computer games. So we are building a whole range of motivators to make that therapy happen. It could be creative. It could be rowing a boat. It could be building a small town. It could be in a photorealistic environment. It could be in a very cartoonish environment. You might be embodied in somebody else's body and you're just moving along with them and allowing that to act as a kind of a graded motor imagery system for your brain, which is getting into the neuro element that VR can present. So what we do is we make it fun, and we make it fun for everyone. And another motivator is that when you put on a VR headset, you're putting on a computer onto your head. And that means that we can track everything that you do, all your movements. So we collect all of that data and let it be analyzed in the back end by the clinician that you're seeing to indicate whether you're improving or declining or how much effort you're putting in. So another motivator is seeing your improvement. All of that information is available to the client as well, the patient. And it's really hard to see over 3 years if you're getting better. It's a really slow process. So if we can digitize that and feed it back to the patient that, yes, the work that you've been doing over the last 2 weeks has actually improved your shoulder flexion or your overall range of motion, that's a really great motivator. But also the clinician is kind of looking over your shoulder and they can see if you've done your exercises or not. They can prescribe lists of exercises, and they can also connect over telehealth and see what you're doing at any time.
That is phenomenal. I love the idea that you have this transparency on both sides. So I guess let's talk about what it looks like. So you mentioned there's a VR headset. What else do you have in terms of either the software applications or physical products?
So yeah, we work with mostly upper body rehabilitation. At the moment, we're trying to figure out legs. The whole entire world is trying to figure out legs in VR so we can do lower body. But right now, because of the technology, we're kind of stuck with upper body. So 2 controllers and a headset, and with a connection to a internet connection, a Wi-Fi connection that allows a whole bunch of back and forth from communication between you and your clinician. And what it's really about is to increase that amount of therapy in between clinical sessions. We're not trying to be a physio. We're trying to extend the physio's practice into the home so that that exercise can happen in between sessions and the outcomes can increase. So it's a really adjunct therapy to still going in, talking to real people. I really believe in the human aspect of any sort of health interaction. So other than that, in the software, we have a range of informational applications, especially in chronic pain. A lot of what chronic pain treatment can be is understanding the fact that your brain might be telling you something that's false, that actually you don't have pain in your hands. It's actually just a heightened threat response after your injury that happened possibly 2 years ago. So we're trying to build a kind of library of education in there as well. And yeah, a lot of guided meditation. You can be, I don't know if you've ever wanted to travel the world or travel Australia, but you can literally be nearly anywhere in the world in RecoveryVR and do therapy. So we're trying to get people out of the house as well. And this technology, this hardware is completely portable. You can do this outside. You can take it on holiday. You can do it in your home. So I really feel like it integrates really nicely into your life. Well, that's what I hope anyway, so that people don't feel like if they change clinicians or they go on holiday that their therapy has to stop. There's always a way to continue that effort towards full motion again.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that continuity is so important because the relative time spent with the therapist in the clinic is so short compared to all of the time that you're in the home, right?
That's right.
Well, I know you mentioned a few specific conditions here, Christian. So I guess what makes RecoveryVR different from other technologies available for people either with these conditions or people who are living with other disabilities?
One of the real beneficial factors of RecoveryVR is that I'm a filmmaker and my team are game developers. We do take that gamification element and use decades worth of built knowledge in the entertainment industry that allows for that kind of addictive gameplay and that kind of interaction that is constant and motivating. So one real big difference is that we build applications that you want to play. And that's really important. Not coming from a medical background, I've been told over and over, is actually a great benefit because I'm not stuck in any single mind frame of how things should be done. So right now in the application, we have over 80 applications, and that's another element of motivation. There's a variety. So you're not doing the same thing every day. There's weeks worth of activities before you have to repeat anything, which is really important, I believe. So you don't need to go to a clinic to use this. You can sit on your couch and do your therapy, and it's just really easy. It's just really easy. And with the connection to the cloud and your clinician, it makes it more effective. It's not just I don't know if you've ever had a physio injury and you've taken home a piece of white paper that tells you how to do your exercises. And the physio, whoever it is, doesn't know if you've done it or not. It's a complete honor system. And this is a completely new way to deliver that. And in the whole world of VR therapy, I think everyone is just scratching the surface on what it can do because you do have complete control of the auditory and visual inputs into the brain. And that is very powerful. In terms of kind of screen-based stuff, in the academic literature, it's actually quite muddled. VR is referred to as many things. So if you're looking at a computer screen and you use a mouse, that could be considered VR, when actually immersive VR, which is this kind of full headset controlling your entire vision, has a completely different effect on the brain. It's completely immersive. We do these applications where we immerse people in somebody else's body, and that body touches hot, cold, rough, all sorts of different sensations. And people with complex regional pain will actually feel pain when those hands touch those things, and they have their hands in their laps. That's just a taste of the effect that immersive VR can have. And I believe that that's just the beginning. We've got to find more ways to leverage that kind of immersive effect to its full potential.
Absolutely. And I love that you had this segue too about the impacts, because I think this has so much potential. There are so many different directions it can go. So Christian, can you talk about the impacts that either RecoveryVR is having already or has the potential to provide for users?
We're still early on. We're still building the data to really show what RecoveryVR can do. And we're currently building version 2 of the product. So because of how I understand the impacts that it can have now. But there's been some fantastic studies happening just recently, especially with applied VR in the States and Oxford VR in England, where these studies are allowing for FDA approval and being recognized as an independent therapy of their own to either reduce pain or reduce anxiety. And the impact, like if you want to talk about the percentage of decrease in pain as an impact for those people, it's incredible. It's up to like 40% decrease in pain.
Oh, wow.
And for somebody with chronic pain, that is everything. That means that they can get up out of bed and get back to work. It's life-changing. So they've built products where you just get a VR headset in the mail and you do a little bit of VR every day. I'm building RecoveryVR so that there's always that human connection. So it's always part of a telehealth program where a human being, a clinician, can really assess if you should go up a level or down a level, because more damage can be done if you don't have an emotional perspective on the patient's health. So RecoveryVR is building similar type applications, but with that real telehealth element. that connects you and protects you from any ill effects of an automated VR experience.
Certainly. And I think even just having that clinician perspective of the whole health picture and how maybe this specific game fits into treating this one specific thing that you have, but how it has all these other applications that might be relevant that patients might not have even thought about.
Yeah, there's been some experiments going on in universities around the world and in all fields like mental health and like anorexia and fear of foods and fear of animals and phobias is a big one that VR can do amazing things about. VR's coming at it from all sides and they're doing really, really weird things, but they seem to be effective. With the advent of speech recognition and AI conversation bots, that's got real potential to change the way that cognitive behavioral therapy will be delivered. So the field of psychology, I think, is going to get a huge boost out of virtual reality. And especially after the pandemic, the amount of anxiety and the amount of people that quit their jobs and the mental health aspects of the entire world have been taking a hit. I don't know what's happening in the rest of the world, but in Australia, we have a severe staff shortage in all sorts of fields and especially health. So if we have these other tools, it's only going to help.
Definitely. And I know we specifically mentioned a lot of emphasis right now is going into looking at applications for people who have had strokes, people who might have chronic pain. Are there other conditions or people who come right to mind who you think this would be a good fit for?
Yeah, so some of the other conditions that I think VR is really suited to, and this first one has been experimented with for decades now, and that is PTSD for war veterans. There's been some amazing companies in America working to not only give them visual and audio, but also the smell and the feel and the heat. And that's just a part of the exposure therapy field that allows people to experience their trauma in a real way, and that's what opens them up. These are people who are closed and don't want to talk about anything. My granddad, he was in World War II and he never said a word about it. He obviously had PTSD for the rest of his life, but exposure therapy can kind of open a door. And when you put them back in the place that gave them that trauma, they'll start talking again. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it also kind of makes sense. Some of the other conditions are definitely autism spectrum disorder. To be able to, in a safe space, practice socialization, learn about facial cues and social cues in a way that can be repetitious and they have the control as well. So it's not somebody trying to tell them over and over how to act. It's about just learning what works in a social environment. And the same for ADHD, especially kids who have trouble focusing, using their whole visual and auditory spectrum to allow them to focus or get distracted and come back as they need is really beneficial. That could change the way that their brain kind of works and the way that their brain learns. And that might have an effect for them for the rest of their life. I'm very interested in taking it one step further and using kind of sensors on the head to understand what kind of areas of the brain that are activated and modulating the VR environment in response to those cues. I think that can really help with a lot of people, as well as transcranial direct current stimulation that helps to allow neurons to fire in a certain area of the brain used while doing a focused activity, which only VR can really shut out the rest of the world and get you to move your arm while activating your motor cortex. But that's a decade away. Those are my dreams of where VR could go.
That is phenomenal, Christian. I am excited for the future of RecoveryVR and just for advancing and innovating these types of therapies that we've discussed today. So we appreciate you sharing your insights with us. If our listeners want to learn more about RecoveryVR, what's the best way for them to do so?
I think the best way is to go to the website. From there, you can get everywhere. And it has a lot of information about what we do. So recoveryvr.com.au. You can book in a meeting with me there as well to talk about possible use in the clinic environment or the home environment. But you could also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. All you have to do is search for RecoveryVR and we'll be there.
Fantastic. Well, listeners, definitely check out the website, get connected on social media to learn more about RecoveryVR. And Christian, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Marie. It's been great.
Listeners, we are excited to let you know about the Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation's upcoming September campaign during the month of September. Each year, amazing people like you from around the world participate in this virtual health and wellness challenge to help us raise funds to support life-changing research and innovation for cerebral palsy. In 2021, we raised $1.86 million, and this year we're hoping to reach even more people to further advance critical, life-changing science for people with cerebral palsy. Registration is now open and it is free to sign up. Visit www.steptember.us to sign up and learn more about how our Steptember trainers can help you support a great cause and reach your fitness goals. Now, listeners, I am excited to introduce you all to our second guest today, Ian Cheok, an occupational therapist who's been using RecoveryVR in his practice. So, Ian, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're excited to learn more about you and more about your experiences with RecoveryVR. So, can you just start by telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
So, I'm an occupational therapist based in Perth, Western Australia. And I'm currently working in a private practice clinic helping people with complex persistent pain and mental health conditions. And I do incorporate a lot of meaningful activities in my therapy sessions for my patients to help with their recovery. And virtual reality is one of these tools that we use at the moment.
Fantastic. So how did you find out initially about RecoveryVR?
Well, to be honest, I've somewhat forgotten about how it actually came about, but I think 3 years ago, I've been dabbling a lot in virtual reality with using other systems, and I had lots of colleagues who are physiotherapists. And I think a dear friend of mine actually mentioned it to me that, hey, Ian, you've got to check out this RecoveryVR system that's based in Australia, because I was using a few other systems that were from America. And we had some issues with, especially with the driving sequences where, in America, everyone drives on a different side in Australia. So it was actually good to hear about an Australian-based VR provider. And I jumped into it, spoke to Christian, and I never looked back since.
That is so cool. So can you walk us through what it's like using RecoveryVR?
So my experience with RecoveryVR has largely been positive. Because I've used other VR systems, and RecoveryVR almost nails it in terms of the usability. It's really easy to set up for both clinicians and patients. And there's a whole range of therapy apps that comes with it, and they're constantly building a library. So they're often very relaxing, engaging, and fun. And this goes to show the founders, Christian, his background was in filmmaking. So it actually shows in the content that comes with RecoveryVR. And also it's built with lots of useful features for the clinician, things like data tracking, telehealth, and being able to create our own prescription list. That's a huge plus. So it's been great so far.
Oh, cool. So do you have a favorite exercise or function that RecoveryVR has?
Oh, yes. I like the walking apps where you can actually use it either as it is, sit back and relax and watch the scenery and immerse yourself into different settings. Or you can start using it as an engagement tool where you start moving your arms and you're actually getting this whole perception of moving, walking. So you can actually use that as a bike ride. Or I think some of my patients, they say, oh, this is so cool. It's like, skateboarding through the city or through the river banks. And that's really, really fun.
Oh, that's cool. So when you first tried it, when you first pulled it out of the box, what was it like the first time you put it on?
I thought, wow, this is another VR headset. It has, I think, the latest chipset and all the geeky stuff that comes with it. But it's the experience that actually matters most when you put it on. I was just amazed with the quality of the content and how they managed to make something so simple and yet engaging, which is really hard to achieve with technology. And it's been really, really interesting to see how far the technology has come over the last, 5 years.
Definitely. So would you say that RecoveryVR has, at least at this point, had a positive impact for you or your patients?
Yes, it's been really positive because I'm now able to personalize my therapy sessions with my patients to make it more meaningful for them. And this often increases their motivation. And also the immersive qualities of the apps that comes with RecoveryVR tend to reduce my patients' anxiety. as they can focus on the activities and feel more relaxed during these therapy sessions. So over time, this helps build their confidence. And a good side effect from that is that they're able to tell me their stories a lot better. So in the long run, it's actually great for building a very, very effective therapeutic relationship between me and my patients.
That's wonderful. So was there any resistance, I guess, when you started introducing this to patients, or did people take to it pretty quickly and naturally?
I think the majority of people are very curious about it. They've heard about it. In the early days, some of them are a bit concerned, like, oh, okay, is this thing going to make me feel dizzy? But these days, because it's been popularized increasingly in the media, so most people actually come to me and say, hey, I want to try this. I've read about it or I've heard about it. So yeah, a lot are approaching with that curiosity, which is really good.
That's awesome. And I know in a clinical therapy session, time is critical. So how has this RecoveryVR system maybe changed the way you structure your sessions with your patients, or has it had an impact on that?
Yes, it has actually saved us a lot of time because as an occupational therapist, we usually would like to know more as much as possible about our patients, how they actually behave and how they actually respond in a contextual activity. So having VR would actually shorten the time, as now I don't have to worry about organizing or scheduling an activity in a particular setting. Let's say if they say, okay, I'm having trouble with public transport, for instance. So I no longer need to actually organize like, okay, meet me at the bus station or the train station. I can actually, with a virtual reality headset, bring them there, create a scenario, and actually step back and watch how they are behaving and the emotional responses during that session. So this enables me to actually get some really good insights into their underlying sensory and functioning issues, if there are any. And it also gives them that peace of mind that, hey, whatever happens to me, I'm safe in the clinic with my therapist. And it's a pretty controlled environment, which allows them to even be able to be more curious and to take more risk. And it works really well for that whole graded exposure therapy that we often use here.
Definitely. I think that point that you made there about feeling safe in the clinic is so important. And it sounds like you've had success with using RecoveryVR in the clinic. Have any of your patients transitioned to using it at home as well?
Yes, they have. We've had quite a few people who are increasingly interested in augmenting what therapies they're receiving and to continue practicing at home because it's more fun. And the thing about VR is that it actually compresses time. It's got this weird quality that 5 minutes in a VR seems like a minute. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes patients would tell me, oh, I've just done my 30-minute exercise today, but it only felt like 2 minutes because I was so immersed in it. And I've just forgotten that, oh, I've spent quite a long time in it.
Oh, that is fantastic. Because I know a lot of these therapy exercises, I mean, the goal is lots of repetitions of these particular movements to help recovery. And that can be a little bit tedious sometimes for patients.
That's right. And having that feedback from patients allows clinicians like myself to even be more empathetic with them as they're able to tell me, hey, I enjoyed this sequence, but walking in the park gives me anxiety. And then we are able to dive deeper into that. Why so? What about, walking in the park, that scene that triggers your anxiety? So yeah, it's a very effective tool for us to actually gauge and understand what our patients are going through, because we're walking in their shoes right now when we put the headset on and actually gauge and understand what they see and experience.
Absolutely. And I like the idea that the RecoveryVR allows you to see with this tracking kind of the patient progress over time. So can you talk a little bit about your experience using this feature?
Yes, the tracking is just amazing. In the past, we've had to get patients to perform certain movements and we measure them and assess them. And it often can be quite anxiety provoking for some patients. So having the VR will just put them into a natural activity, which makes sense to them. And they just perform naturally without having any performance anxiety. And the VR headset and the controllers would actually track their movements, and we're able to record all of this data in real time and be able to analyze it later on. So there are lots of good reports that comes with clinicians module, the data tracking side. And yeah, it's really good for measuring outcomes. So over time, we can actually measure and let our patients know that they are making some good progress. And we do not actually have to interrupt whatever they're doing to just say, hey, this is not working out. And you just use it overcompensating with one side of your body. We just let them go ahead and have fun and engage. And after the session, we're able to analyze and see, okay, this is what's happened. And you have made some improvements during this game, but we can make more progress by getting you to move that weaker side of your body.
Oh, that's so cool. And we touched on a little bit the kinds of patients you work with in your practice. Ian, if you were to, expand and think big picture here, who all do you think might benefit from using RecoveryVR?
Well, I guess patients in recovery, whether they're in the acute stages or experiencing chronic issues, I would say even in the acute stage, it's useful for them to not just sit and relax and recover. Being active at all stages of your recovery journey, it's very, very important. So RecoveryVR has the potential to make lots of good inroads into the hospital system, I'd say. So I've actually spoken to a few of my colleagues who are working in hospitals. And oftentimes patients, when they're recovering, they can't do much. Some of them are bedridden, and it will be really good for them to actually use a tool like RecoveryVR at that stage to actually keep themselves really occupied so that they feel more confident with their healing process.
Absolutely. And you mentioned not only physical rehabilitation and recovery, but also this mental health aspect as well. So can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yes, I do work a lot with people with mental health diagnosis, especially in the post-trauma stress disorder, PTSD. So lots of my patients tend to come from the workers' comp or the motor vehicle insurance referrals. And they often come with not just chronic pain issues, but also the trauma that they're trying to overcome. So a lot of them would have experienced like mild or even acute PTSD. And that is really hard to work on. It has to be very gradual. And we have to do it in a very, very safe and comforting environment for them to feel that, hey, I can recover, but it has to be in a very, very safe environment. And we can facilitate that with VR.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, Ian, do you have a message that you'd like to share with any listeners out there, potentially any clinicians or patients who might be considering trying RecoveryVR?
Yeah, so for patients, yes, I often remind my patients that VR is not a panacea, it's not medicine, but it's a great tool to help augment the therapies that they are already receiving to further assist with their recovery. And for clinicians, I'd say it's a great tool to add into your clinical practice. It just makes things a lot easier, right? Like a tool. And for everyone, I'd say try it like chocolates or ice cream. You can talk about it all day long, but nothing actually beats experiencing it.
I love that comparison. You're making me hungry here, Ian. Well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today. We appreciate you sharing your insights. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, it's been great to have you with us as well. When you have a moment, please subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to let others know what you think of the show. And we look forward to connecting with you again in our next episode of Changing What's Possible.